First, our public service announcements. If you have any technical issues whatsoever, please use the chat box for Lisa Silverman and address Lisa and let her know that you're having some issues and she will assist you. We also would like you to use the chat box for questions and introduce yourself and explore the resources we'll share in the chat box as we go through our discussion today. Welcome, Renee, from Blue Cross Blue Shield of Tennessee. Okay, and again, I'm Donna Merrick, Product Enhancement Principal with URAC. I focus on the revisions to the non-pharmacy care management programs that URAC offers. We also have Jenn Richards with us today, who's a Product Development Principal. Jenn has helped us revise our major programs in the pharmacy area with specialty pharmacy and mail service pharmacy, as well as others. And Jenn has also helped us draft some initial programs in that area. And then there's Lisa Silverman, again, Client Education Specialist, who's on hand to help us with technical issues today and the polling. And speaking of polling, we'll go ahead with our first opening poll. Does your health plan delegate pharmacy and therapeutic functions and/or formulary and drug management to a PBM? We'll give you a moment to weigh in. Looks like we've got, see how many people? It's about 14 people in attendance. Let's see if we can get about half at least. Okay, so it looks like a good portion of you that are working with health plans or work at health plans delegate pharmacy and therapeutic functions. We'll be talking more about that as we move forward. And some of you don't. So we'll go ahead, start. We have two focus areas for today's discussion: PBM-PT for Pharmacy and Therapeutics Committee that I'll speak to, and then PBM-FDM, Formulary and Drug Management, that Jenn Richards will be speaking to. The three non-pharmacy accreditation programs that include those two focus areas are listed here, and as you can see, they are all health plan programs. So this particular focus area has two standards, one committee members and the other committee meetings and responsibilities. So let's cover the Pharmacy and Therapeutics Committee standards and elements of performance. There are three elements of performance groups associated with this standard that address important aspects of the Pharmacy and Therapeutics Committee membership, namely membership, conflict of interest, and membership exclusions. All of those elements of performance support the standard. The organization maintains a Pharmacy and Therapeutics Committee. We have the same language that is used for committee membership that was found in previous versions of these standards and elements of performance. And we've also made a few changes in that we changed from the term consumers to members throughout. The language was also streamlined, and we removed specialty representation or consult requirements in this particular set of elements of performance. Organizations are required to describe what qualifications constitute an expert, if you see element D there on your screen. For element A, you'll want to cross-reference the foundational focus area, elements of performance, OPIN, or Operations and Infrastructure 2-1, which is the credentialing standard for clinical staff. So for review, on the desktop, you'll provide a Pharmacy and Therapeutics charter and/or other committee documents, including selection criteria and member replacement. The Pharmacy and Therapeutics Committee meeting minutes will also be submitted that demonstrate member participants. There are no validation review activities for this particular set of elements of performance. Okay. The next set of elements of performance, PBM PT 1-2, conflict of interest. We're basically using the same language to describe conflict of interest. What is different this time is that this is a weighted standard, a weight of 4. And on the desktop review, the Pharmacy and Therapeutics Charter and/or committee documents outlining the conflict of interest policy is submitted on desktop. And for validation review, we'll review the signed conflicts of interest statements for all members of the Pharmacy and Therapeutics Committee. So make sure they have their conflict of interest statements signed. And you'll note that this is not a change from the previous standard requirements for validation review. Now, the third set of elements of performance. The Pharmacy and Therapeutics Committee excludes product sponsor representatives from membership. So the exclusion language is there, but we also removed the requirement to adhere to a pharmacy and therapeutics policies on disclosures related to conflict of interest, and removed most of the interpretive information that supported that. The product sponsors may provide information to be presented at the Pharmacy and Therapeutics Committee, but they may not attend. For the desktop, you'll be providing the P&T charter or other committee documents outlining membership exclusion policy. There are no activities for the validation review for this set of elements of performance. Again, you must exclude product sponsors, but they may provide information that can be presented at the P&T committee. The second standard in this section, committee meetings and responsibilities. There are 2 sets of elements of performance supporting this standard that address meeting arrangement, meeting management, and P&T committee responsibilities. So we have similar language regarding meeting administration. The meetings are quarterly. You must document the decisions, and ad hoc meetings are held for emergent issues. What's different from the prior language, previous versions, is that we removed language specific to preferred drug list development or revision for documentation requirements. So the documentation is broadened to all decisions and includes recommendations. And also the interpretive information was removed. For desktop review, you guessed it, the P&T charter and or other committee documents outlining meeting requirements, and we'll look at P&T meeting minutes demonstrating decisions and recommendations in writing. The next set of elements of performance, PBM PT 2-2, responsibilities. Note that element A evaluates drugs for the formulary, and the language has been updated from selects to approves and is based it on evidence. We've included interpretive information relative to scientific evidence, may include real world evidence and patient experience when available. For element B, we're looking for evaluating utilization management activities, and we removed additional language about what those activities are. For element D, the organization timely considers FDA approved drugs, and timely needs to be defined by the organization. We also changed from, quote, new molecular entities to, quote, new FDA approved drug products or indications, broadening that element. So what's different? The requirements call you to consider alternative therapies requirements, and in element E, consider new evidence. For example, we include FDA safety alerts, manufacturer updates, and so forth. So timely, again, needs to be defined by your organization, and we'd expect to see that in your documentation which of course includes the P&T charter and other committee documents describing the responsibilities. P&T meeting minutes are documented and available during the validation review. So we have a couple of questions, and it looks like, Jen, you've responded to the one from Tom. We'll have a more in-depth discussion regarding delegation requirements towards the end of the webinar. Yes, we have some detailed slides for that, Tom, and so we'll be sure to cover that with you. Any other questions regarding P&T committee? The documentation for this is pretty straightforward. Most of the review is done on desktop with a couple of activities during validation review, in particular P&T committee minutes. Okay. Now for our next poll. Lisa is going to administer it for us. Does your health plan delegate to a PBM, one, the other, or both P&T functions, formulary and drug management, A and B, or no delegation? We know not everyone on the call is from a health plan. So, but for those of you that are, we'd like you to weigh in on the poll. And the results are in. Formulary and drug management, 75%. Otherwise, the health plans are not delegating. Okay. All right, so we'll move on to that next focus area, formulary and drug management.
Thanks, Donna. So before we dive into this area, let's do just a quick overview real quick before we get to delegation. We understand that a lot of health plans delegate either P&T, formulary and drug, or both. So recognizing that delegation requirements, URAC's delegation requirements, ask that you remain accountable for the compliance of those standards. We want to make sure that you guys have a full understanding of what is required under those standards. As we get into delegation further within this webinar, we'll dive into what that means and how oversight is handled, all of that. There's a couple of differences between P&T and formulary and drug management when you don't delegate both that you kind of need to think through. So more so on the formulary and drug management side, where formulary management is reliant on P&T decisions. So diving into this standard, our first standard is formulary management under FDM. And it really is driving the organization to develop and review formularies that assure therapeutic appropriateness. There is one element of performance group under this standard, and this is our formulary management element of performance group. So same as previous versions, formulary development is required. That's a mandatory here, or not actually a mandatory. Yes, actually it's a mandatory standard, but it's required under this standard. P&T decisions need to be integrated into the formulary management decisions, and review of drug class for therapeutic appropriateness is important to these standards. The cost should only be addressed after safety, efficacy, side effects, and therapeutic need. And that is addressed within this element of performance group as well. There are a few differences. So we really worked to separate out what is P&T and what is formulary management. What are they responsible for? How do they manage their functions and their responsibilities? And we separated them into two completely separate areas. Review of drug placement, at least annually. We did remove that, or we still have that in here as a review of formulary placement within a therapeutic class at least annually. So just a little bit of language movement there. And then removed any policy requirements for formulary management. And this is more of a function of documenting the review process than anything. So it's still a requirement, but it's along the lines of documentation of these elements. Again, anything that is a time frame that is not specified by URAC is defined by the organization, such as periodic. And that would be under B, specifically periodic review of drug and drug class therapeutic appropriateness. For desktop review, the formulary management documents really outlining the practices of how the formulary is managed. That there are no validation review methods associated with this element of performance group. So that standard is our basic mandatory standard of how overarching formulary management is conducted. From there, we have PBM-PT2, which is our formulary exceptions and coverage exclusions. So moving into formulary exceptions first, this, Donna, if you could go next slide. Perfect, thank you. So this is the same as previous versions where we were requiring exceptions. We did update the language to clearly call out what was a formulary exception process. And then separated that from coverage exclusions, recognizing that those are two separate concepts. They may follow the same practices, but they are two separate concepts, and organizations who don't follow the same practices can use two separate two separate processes to handle those two functions. Definitely streamline language here, try to remove any ancillary words that weren't really needed and didn't come across as getting to the intent of the standard. And then prescribers may request exceptions on behalf of the patient. So we did add allows members and prescribers to request a review for exception. And this may include access to drugs prior to formulary placement if that's part of your process for handling those types of medications. A review for this on desktop will include, again, your formulary management documents, really outlining the process of how members and prescribers request this type of review and what that flow is through your organization. There are no validation review elements for this. And then we have our coverage exclusions. Our coverage exclusions are also streamlined language, really to call out benefit design exclusions that are associated with drug management. So the organization still needs to have a process to handle those requests that are excluded from coverage. We did remove mention of any community resources here, recognizing this is a pharmacy element and drug management is our primary function. We did provide examples along with this as well. So think fertility medications, appetite suppression, cosmetics, weight loss. A lot of organizations have mechanisms to provide coverage exclusions for an entire class of medications. On desktop review, we will be looking for the documents that outline the process associated with coverage exclusions and how the organization handles that request and what the process is through the organization with that request. And the validation review, there is nothing as well. Any questions on P&T, or sorry, drug management or P&T? We can go back there as well. Any questions on any of that? All right.
All right.
That being said, I'll pass back over to Donna. We'll go through some delegation.
Thank you, Jen. And for this, I will be referring back to the foundational focus area, operations and infrastructure, elements of performance 1-2, delegation management, which applies. So we're going to take a deep dive here. The first question you'll want to ask is, are you delegating to a URAC accredited PBM? If you are, On desktop review, you'll be providing us with a list of delegated functions. You'll want to upload that in the AccrediTnet 3 system. And you'll want to include a delegation plan that will show that you have a way of verifying that the accreditation for the organization you're delegating to, the contractor, is current. Note that if the URAC accredited PBM is not URAC accredited, for desktop, you'll still provide a list of the delegated functions, and your delegation plan will be more elaborate in this case. You're going to need to describe the oversight. And so the oversight, you'll want to align with the desktop and validation review requirements that URAC has spelled out in the accreditation guide. So again, the difference there is minimal, except that the delegation plan for organizations that are not URAC PBM accredited will be more descriptive and more elaborate, describing the oversight plan.
And just to note, Donna, delegation to a URAC accredited PBM is helpful. This could also be a URAC accredited health plan or any organization that has these standards associated with their program.
Okay. So following up with that on validation review, the delegation agreement is made available for review. And note that sensitive business information may be redacted, and the delegation agreement applies whether the contractor is PBM, you're accredited for PBM functions or not. If the PBM is URAC accredited, however, the applicant organization need only show that it has proof of the contractor's PBM accreditation. If not URAC accredited, evidence of annual oversight using the demonstrating compliance methods outlined in the program guide available for the URAC reviewer to examine. So that would be what we would look for. They would have the evidence of oversight and would make that available for the validation review for non-URAC accredited PBMs. I see a question from Renee. So for OPIN 1-1, a URAC certificate for the delegate would be acceptable. Would you need other documentation? A certificate, current certificate showing accreditation, or a screenshot of the contractors listed on our website as accredited would also be acceptable and is an easy way to demonstrate compliance. Good question.
So Donna, we also have a question regarding OPIN 1-2, and just as reference, it is OPIN 1-2 that we're talking about, delegation management. OPIN 1-1 technically discusses policy and procedure maintenance. So just want to make sure everybody's on the same page there. As far as what is required for OPIN 1-2 for this particular form of accreditation, there is no, it's these two scenarios. Either you are URAC accredited and your requirements are along the lines of ensuring that the delegated entity is it continues to remain URAC compliant or URAC accredited, or you're delegating to a non-accredited PBM or organization, and your requirements are oversight of their functions. So no, there are no additional requirements prior to this version. There were a few iterations of this version, first of all, and there was some differences in how we would score under prior versions. And then even prior to that, we had our core 6 through 9, which was a very elaborate, cumbersome requirement around contracting with delegates. So this is it for this version of accreditation. You either follow the yes or you follow the no, and that's it.
And I think part of the question too, as many of you from in the past have put, when you were some of you might have thought it was not applicable if you delegated. So you'll want to show that you are meeting these standards, these elements of performance, and this is how you would do that.
The one other thing I do want to mention here, Donna, is that the oversight plan requires annual oversight. And that's the requirement regardless if you are delegating to a URAC accredited organization or a non-accredited organization. So if you are delegating to an accredited organization and your oversight plan requires that you verify accreditation, make sure that that is following within the annual requirement as well. And you will need to demonstrate that you were able to verify that annually. Any other questions?
So yes, it is far easier to delegate to a URAC accredited organization. We kept that. Jen, any questions? Nope. Okay.
No, I've got nothing else.
All right, then we'll move on and wrap up here. Future webinars include monthly AccreditNet training. That's coming up on Wednesday, October the 12th. URAC's Chief Information Officer, Maggie Cornett, provides that training at 2 p.m. Eastern, and you're welcome to join us, as some of you may be using AccreditNet 3 for the first time for a reaccreditation or for your first time application. We also have our first on-site in-person meeting webinar experience here for URAC Connect. That is in October on the 25th and the 26th. It's quality and excellence across the healthcare summit. You're welcome to come and join us and meet with members of our executive team, learn more about our foundational focus areas. And also we'll talk a little bit about the federal and state regulatory impact on standards and practices in healthcare. So feel free to come to URAC's website and get more information and register for our in-person summit coming up later this month. And thank you, Lisa. You would go to clients.urac.org for those of you to go through that portal, and you'll get all the information you need. Any other questions or comments or thoughts before we close the presentation out? Okay, well, seeing no further, you're welcome, Deborah. Well, thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon. We look forward to hopefully seeing you in Washington, D.C. And otherwise, have a good evening, and thanks again for coming. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.